What if the strangest rule in the Fast and Furious universe isn't about cars, gravity, or impossible stunts, but about villains? Because in this franchise something strange keeps happening. The people who try to destroy the family eventually end up joining it. The man who hunted them, the man who almost killed them, the man who actually killed one of them. Somehow, he ends up sitting at the same table, eating barbecue, laughing with the same people he once tried to wipe out. And no characters show this rule better than the Shaw brothers, Deckard Shaw and Owen Shaw, because if you go back and watch what they actually did, their redemption becomes one of the strangest turns in the entire franchise. Start with Owen Shaw. In Fast and Furious 6, he isn't just another villain. He is introduced as a tactical mastermind, a military strategist, someone who runs a global mercenary crew that can outthink governments. From the moment he appears, the film makes one thing clear. Shaw is the anti-Dom, cold, calculated, completely focused on the mission. He manipulates the entire team by using one person. Letty Ortiz is brought back into the story with amnesia, fighting on Shaw's side, believing Dom and the others are the enemy. And Shaw doesn't hesitate to use that. He turns Letty into a weapon against the very family she once died for. The team spends the entire movie chasing him across Europe. High-speed chases, military convoys, tank attacks on the highway. Shaw escalates every situation, until the final act pushes everything into pure insanity. A cargo plane taking off on a runway that feels like it stretches across half a continent. Cars racing at full speed while mercenaries fight across the wings and fuselage. Dom's team trying to stop Shaw before the plane lifts off. And in the chaos, Shaw loses. His car gets launched of the aircraft, crashing violently below. For most movies that would be the end of the villain. But in Fast and Furious, villains don't disappear that easily. Because the Shaw story was only beginning, entered the older brother, Deckard Shaw. In Furious 7, he is introduced with one message: revenge. He walks into the hospital where Owen lies in a coma, looks at his brother, and promises something simple. Dominic Toretto will pay for this. And then the movie shows exactly what that means. Deckard Shaw doesn't just threaten the team. He systematically hunts them. He destroys their headquarters with a bomb. He nearly kills several members of the crew. He tracks Dom across cities and continents. And most importantly, he is revealed as the man responsible for one of the most painful moments in the entire franchise. The death of Han Lu, the quiet fan favorite from Tokyo. The character whose loss shocked the entire team. For years, Shaw was the man who killed Han, not by accident, not in a fight, but with a calculated explosion meant to send a message. So think about that for a second. Owen Shaw manipulates Letty and wages war on the team. Deckard Shaw kills Han and launches a global revenge mission. These are not minor antagonists. These are personal enemies. The kind of villains that normally stay villains forever. And yet, something strange begins to happen as the series moves forward. The Shaw brothers start drifting toward the same side as the family. It begins quietly. Later entries start reframing Deckard Shaw, not as a monster, but as a soldier. A man who did terrible things, but for reasons he believed were justified. Then comes one of the most surprising turns. In The Fate of the Furious, the story forces an impossible alliance. Dom's son is trapped aboard a plane, surrounded by enemies. And the person who ends up fighting through that aircraft to rescue the child is Deckard Shaw, the same man who killed Han, the same man who hunted the team. Suddenly, he is battling mercenaries across the cabin, protecting the baby, carrying him through the firefight while calmly eliminating every threat in his path. It's one of the most surreal reversals the franchise has ever done. And the twist doesn't stop there, because Owen Shaw returns too, alive, working alongside his brother, helping stop the greater threat. Two former enemies of the family, now operating almost like reluctant allies. And eventually, the tension dissolves even further. The war fades. The rivalry cools down, until the moment that probably confused fans the most. The barbecue scene, the sacred ending ritual of the franchise. The place reserved only for the people Dom calls family. And there, sitting among them, is Deckard Shaw, the man who once destroyed their lives, eating, talking, sharing the table, as if the past had somehow been rewritten. That moment sparked one of the biggest debates among fans of the franchise. Did the story actually redeem Shaw? Or did it just move on and hope the audience would forget what happened before? Some viewers see it as character growth, a brutal world where enemies sometimes become allies when bigger threats appear. Others see it as the Fast Saga slowly bending its own rules. Because once a villain is popular enough, the story finds a way to pull them into the family. and the Shaw brothers may be the clearest example of that transformation. But once you notice the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere, because the Shaws might not be the only enemies who cross that line. And once you start asking that question, the history of the entire franchise suddenly looks very different. But Dominic Toretto didn't just change the lives of the people who followed him. He changed the lives of the men who were sent to hunt him. And no one proves that better than Brian O'Connor and Luke Hobbs, because before loyalty, before barbecues, before the word family meant anything to outsiders, there were two outsiders looking in from the opposite side of the law. Brian O'Connor and Luke Hobbs. Two badges. Two hunters. Two very different paths into the same family. When we first meet Brian, he isn't a racer. He isn't family. He isn't even Brian the legend yet. He's a cop, a young undercover officer sent straight into the world of Dominic's crew during the events of the first film. Watching them, studying them, pretending to belong while secretly reporting everything. The early scenes make it clear, Brian isn't just infiltrating a group of street racers. He's infiltrating a culture built on trust and loyalty. And every race, every late-night garage conversation, every moment sitting at that table slowly chips away at the line between duty and belief. The moment that defines everything isn't a race, and it isn't a fight. It's that quiet scene at the end, when Brian hands Dominic the keys to the Supra and lets him go. In that single decision, the entire arc of Brian O'Connor changes. The cop dies there, not literally, but morally. That moment is one of the cleanest narrative pivots the franchise has ever done, because it doesn't feel forced. It feels earned. Brian didn't just switch sides. He chose something bigger than the badge. And from that point forward, every film treats him less like an outsider and more like the bridge between worlds, the guy who understood both sides and still chose family. That's why Brian's transition works so beautifully. It wasn't sudden. It was human. He questioned things. He struggled with loyalty. And when he finally chose Dom's side, it felt like the story itself had crossed a line it could never uncross. But then comes Luke Hobbs, and Hobbs is different. When Hobbs enters the story in Fast 5, he isn't undercover. He isn't conflicted. He's a force of nature. A DSS agent built like a tank, walking into Io with one mission: capture Dom and his crew. The early scenes show him as relentless, calculating, almost mythic. He's not there to understand them. He's there to break them. For half the film, Hobbs is the unstoppable hunter. He tracks them through the city, interrogates criminals, storms hideouts, and every time he gets closer the tension rises because, unlike Brian years before, Hobbs doesn't hesitate. When Hobbs finally corners Dom, it explodes into one of the most brutal fights in the franchise. Two immovable forces colliding, fists instead of engines. It's not pretty. It's raw. And in that moment, Hobbs sees something Brian saw years earlier. Not criminals, not targets, but people who live by a code. And then the film flips the dynamic again. When the real enemy strikes and Hobbs' team is attacked, everything changes. The hunt becomes survival. Suddenly, the man chasing Dom is forced to stand beside him, and what follows is one of the strangest alliances in the series. Hobbs doesn't slowly integrate like Brian did. He crashes into the family through necessity. They fight together. They survive together. And by the time the legendary vault heist roars through the streets of Io, Hobbs isn't chasing them anymore. He's watching them. The final scene says everything. Hobbs opens the safe expecting millions. Instead, he finds it empty, and he smiles. That moment is fascinating because Hobbs understands exactly what happened. Dom outplayed everyone. The law, the criminals, even Hobbs himself. And instead of being angry, Hobbs respects it. He lets them go. That smile is basically Hobbs saying something Brian understood long ago. Sometimes the system doesn't deserve the win. Which brings us to the deeper question. Brian and Hobbs entered the story the same way as the law-hunting Dominic Toretto, but their transformations reveal two completely different philosophies. Brian crossed the line because he believed in Dom. Hobbs crossed the line because he respected him. Brian became family emotionally. Hobbs became family through honor. One was personal. The other was professional. And yet both arrived at the same destination, standing beside Dom instead of chasing him. Which raises something the series rarely says out loud. Maybe the Fast Saga isn't really about races. Maybe it's about people who start on opposite sides and slowly realize the line between right and wrong isn't where they thought it was. Brian saw it first. Hobbs saw it later. But they both saw it. And if you really look at the story, that might be why Dominic Toretto's world keeps growing. because the people sent to stop him keep becoming the people who understand him best. But here's the real twist. Brian stepped away from the life to protect his family. Hobbs walked away from the law to fight bigger wars. Two different exits, two different legacies. And now the question hanging over the entire saga is impossible to ignore. If the road brings them all back together one more time, what happens when the cop who became family and the hunter who became an ally stand on the same side again? And realize the final race might demand a sacrifice none of them are ready for. But if Brian and Hobbs prove that enemies can become family, the next examples push that idea to a much stranger place. Because some enemies didn't just chase the crew. Some of them destroyed their lives first. And yet somehow, the story still bends them back toward the same table. Take Cypher. When she first appears in The Fate of the Furious, she isn't just another villain trying to steal something or run some operation. She breaks Dominic Toretto himself. She manipulates him, forces him to betray the crew, nearly gets Letty killed during the street race ambush, and reveals the real reason Dom obeyed her orders the entire time. She had his son, a child Dom didn't even know existed. Cypher had already murdered the boy's mother, Elena Neves, right in front of him. One shot, no hesitation. Then she kidnapped the baby and used him as leverage to control the most loyal man in the entire franchise. This wasn't just another rivalry. This was personal in the most brutal way the series had ever shown. And the crew spent the entire film trying to stop her while Dom was forced to work against them. In the end, Cypher escapes. Elena is dead, and the only thing Dom gets back is his son. The damage is permanent, or at least, it should be. Because years later, when Fast X begins, Cypher suddenly shows up at Dom's own house, not as the unstoppable mastermind from before, but as someone running from an even bigger threat. Dante, the same woman who killed the mother of Dom's child, is now standing inside his home asking for help, and the story somehow moves forward from there. Later, we even see her helping Letty escape captivity in Antarctica, the two of them literally fighting each other on the way out because the hatred obviously hasn't disappeared. But the plot still puts them on the same side when survival demands it. It's chaotic, messy, and honestly a little surreal to watch. But Cypher isn't the only example of this strange gravitational pull the family seems to have. Because in Fast 9 the story introduces someone even closer to Dom than any enemy before. Jakob Toretto, Dom's own brother. A man he spent decades believing betrayed their father and destroyed their family. When Jakob appears, he isn't just an antagonist. He's a full-scale global threat working with Cypher herself. The crew chase him across half the world. They fight him on rooftops, on highways, inside collapsing bunkers. Dom and Jakob literally tried to kill each other more than once. The anger between them goes back to childhood, to the night their father died during a race, to a secret Dom believed his brother caused. For most of the film, Jakob stands on the opposite side of everything Dom represents. And yet, by the end, the truth comes out. The past wasn't what Dom believed. The hatred cracks. The brothers finally stand side by side again, fighting together instead of against each other. Jakob sacrifices his own freedom to save Dom and the crew, disappearing into the shadows as the latest enemy who somehow became family. And then Fast X pushes the idea even further. Because the same brother Dom spent an entire movie hunting down, becomes the man trusted to protect his son. The same son who was once used to control him by Cypher. Think about that for a second. The franchise begins with Dom protecting his crew from the outside world. But by this point, the outside world has almost completely merged with the crew itself. Former enemies are everywhere. Deckard Shaw, Owen Shaw, Brian O'Connor, Luke Hobbs, Jakob Toretto, even Cypher orbiting the same story again and again. And at this point, you almost start to wonder if by the end of Fast 11 she might somehow end up at the same barbecue table too, and that raises the real question behind all of this. Is this bad writing? Or is it actually the core idea of the Fast saga taken to its absolute extreme? Because from the very beginning the series wasn't really about racing. It wasn't about heists. It wasn't even about action. It was about loyalty. About the idea that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose. And if that idea keeps expanding, if it keeps pulling more people into the circle, even the ones who once stood completely against it, maybe the story isn't repeating itself. Maybe it's showing how powerful that idea has become inside this world. Or maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe Fast and Furious just loves turning enemies into allies because it keeps the universe growing bigger and crazier with every film. Either way, the result is the same. The people who once tried to destroy the family somehow keep ending up at the same table. And if the past few movies proved anything, it's that the next enemy might not stay an enemy for long.